Counterterrorism Today. Up-to-date analysis with Dan Diker.
Dan Diker here next to the microphone. This is Counterterrorism Today. With Iran continuing to march towards nuclear weapons and regional hegemony, not in spite of the JCPOA, we're going to ask a serious question today. Has the West fueled Iranian hegemony and Iranian nuclear capabilities? Has the West played into a serious, some say miscalculation, others say strongly made calculation as to where we are today? The Revolutionary Guards warning to give the United States a strong slap in the face as of this morning, continuing to launch cyber attacks against Saudi Arabia and other Western amenable states across the Middle East. And there really is a question is where Israel and the United States stand today from a security sense point of view. We have four major experts on the Iranian file with us here at the International Disciplinary Center, Herzliya. This is IDC International Radio, and I'd like to introduce our guest. Sitting with me in the studio is Dr. Eli Karmon, who's a senior research scholar at the International Institute for Counterterrorism here at the IDC, an expert in non-conventional terror, as well as, oh goodness gracious, all issues having to do with national security and counterterrorism across the Middle East and Europe. I must say, a former professor of mine here at IDC, and very happy to have you with us, Dr. Karmon. Dr. Ori Goldberg, an honor to have you with us as well. Dr. Goldberg is the author of the well-received book Thinking Shia, as they say in Hebrew, Lachshov Shia, Thinking Shia, which is published, was part of the IDF Radio's broadcast university series, and then he was a co-author of another important book called The Art of the Middle Ground in Iran and Lebanon by Cambridge University Press in 2013. Thank you for joining us, Ori. We're going to need to hear from you on what's going on in the ideological mind of the regime. And then joining us from Washington, a very patient Dr. Michael Ledeen, who's been waiting to come on the program for some time now. And Dr. Ledeen is the co-author, together with Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, of the very well received and even hailed book on stateside, which is called Field of Fight, The Field of Fight, and according to which is about recognizing the Iranian regime for what it is and really teaching, arming the West for how to confront it. Dr. Ledeen, thank you for joining us on Counterterrorism Today.
Happy to be here.
Wonderful. We'll be getting to you in just a moment. I want to introduce our fourth guest and another scholar and teacher here at the Interdisciplinary Center, Herzliya, and that is Meir Javedanfar, who is the owner and editor of the Iran-Israel Observer. He's also a scholar and teaches a course on contemporary Iranian politics here at the IDC Herzliya, and he's very well known in Israel as an Iranian Israeli with great insights, cultural insights, and ideological insights on what's happening in Iran, having grown up there before making his life here in Israel. Welcome, Mr. Javedanfar, to the program.
Thank you, Dan, and greetings to all your listeners and fellow guests.
Thank you. We are live on IDC Facebook site, live streaming, and then this will, of course, will be podcasted as all of our other Counterterrorism Today programs are. We try to bring you the deepest professional discussion about where Israel, the Middle East, and the West stand from a counterterrorism standpoint with all of the great challenges that the Middle East or the Near East and North African region present us. Dr. Ledeen, may I turn to you, calling in basically from the Washington area. You have said, and so has your co-author, frankly, former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn, Lieutenant General, you've said, know your enemy. Know your enemy. This is a theme of your book, The Field of Fight. You've been following the Iranian regime for decades. How is if the West is fueling or encouraging Iranian terror. How is it working, and how are you seeing it from there today?
Well, I think there's much too much compartmentalization in the analysis of Iran and their objectives and their passions. People always say what the Iranians want is regional hegemony, when the Iranians want global hegemony, and they've said it ever since 1979. And if you just go to Supreme Leader Khamenei's website, what you'll find is that he proclaims himself the leader of the Muslims of the world, not just the Shia and not just the Iranians, but all Muslims everywhere. So Iran follows along in the course of the 20th century totalitarian regimes, both fascist and communist, in seeking global domination and taking their own ideology very seriously, and we more than often do not. And I don't think that still there is a government in the Western world, if there is, I haven't seen it, that defines Iran not only as the world's leading sponsor of terrorism, we all say that, but as a would-be global hegemon, as a country that wants to rule the world. I think it was Ahmadinejad not so long ago when he was president who said the Iranian people have to prepare to rule the world. And that sort of thing isn't taken nearly seriously enough, Dan, I think.
Mm-hmm. So when Lieutenant General Flynn has said time and time again, know your enemy, is it your sense as authors that the West does not know the depths of what is going on in the minds of their enemies when it comes to the Iranian regime and its proxies across the Near East?
Yep, exactly right.
Eli Karmon, what's your sense of it from Tel Aviv? How do you see? I mean, does Israel know its enemy? Here you have an alignment between the incoming American administration, the current American administration, and the current Israeli coalition under Mr. Netanyahu. There seems to be a realignment of worldview with regard to Iran, not only perhaps tactical cooperation between the United States and Israel.
I think that Israeli establishment officials and also most of the experts understand very well the threat of the Iranian regime. And I agree with Michael Ledeen because looking to the flag of the Revolutionary Guards of Iran and the Hezbollah, it is a globe and superposed on it, it's a Kalashnikov, which means that they want or they have a global agenda, try to achieve global influence, and do it through the armed struggle. And the problem with the West, I think, it is that it didn't take seriously always. Sometimes, clearly, they were very worried, for instance, by building the anti-missile system of NATO, which is clearly targeting Iranian missiles. It's not only Israel or the United States, it's NATO itself involved in this project. But sometimes you see Western and sometimes even American politicians that consider that because of the Sunni radical jihadist threat, Iran is a moderate element in the Middle East and globally. And I think indeed the regime is a jihadist regime trying to unite, by the way, the Shia and the Sunni under the doctrine of Khomeini, not under the Wahhabi doctrine. And if they would succeed, they clearly would like to have a global influence and not only presence.
Dr. Goldberg, what's your sense of it? My sense in our past conversations is that you're a little bit more optimistic about the JCPOA, what people in the West are calling the Iran deal, the Iran nuclear deal, and its ability to stabilize perhaps issues in the Middle East with regard to Iran.
Well, I'd generally like to offer an alternative take on the Iranian stance in the region. I think the Iranians are, even at the more extreme tangents of the regime, I think they are first and foremost pragmatists. I think they don't see themselves as global leaders, even potentially. It's true that this was the Khomeini's doctrine, but it is my understanding that they are not actively engaged in exporting their revolution and have not been actively engaged for some time. I don't think they're liberals or great humanitarians by any means, but I think they have a very clear understanding of their place in the Islamic world and in the region. I think they understand very well that it is far from likely that they would be able to persuade any Sunni, particularly Arabs, to follow their lead. And I think what the JCPOA is doing, I guess I would say it is mostly highlighting the internal rifts within the Iranian regime. The Iranian regime, the Iranian leadership, speaks with several quite distinct voices. Certainly there's the voice of the Revolutionary Guards, which is revolutionary and purist, and reminds me, you know, in a very sort of free associative way, of the old Cuban Guard, for example, or the old Revolutionary Guard in China. These are people for whom the revolution is, as it is, strict, uncompromising to the death. However, the Iranian leadership also has a plethora of voices that are speaking a very pragmatist, very what I guess we would call conservative in a European or American sense language of leadership and authority. They're trying to do all sorts of things. They're trying to reform Iran's economy. They're trying to secure Iran's place in the region. Some of them, like President Rouhani, are trying to exude an image of the responsible grown-up in a region full of unruly children. So in that sense, I would say that the JCPOA is demonstrating effectively how multifocal the Iranian regime is right now. And in that sense, it's a stabilizing force. Because for the West to improve its understanding of Iran, to arrive at a more complex grasp of the unique phenomenon that is the Iranian regime, that is ultimately a stabilizing force and will ensure the ability to engage Iran, to deal with Iran in a more nuanced and sophisticated way.
You know, Dr. Ledeen, when we hear Dr. Goldberg offering his more optimistic analysis, which seems to me, I've heard this in Washington, this type of debate. And there's those that are saying that perhaps Iran is not exporting the revolution, but if you go to Syria on the ground, you go to Lebanon on the ground, you look at Israel from Gaza, you even look at Iranian regime cells in the West Bank, one says, well, if that isn't exporting the revolution, what is it? What is?
Right, or go to Venezuela or go all over Africa and look at IRGC officials and terrorists training the locals and spreading the doctrine and so forth. No, I don't agree with Dr. Goldberg, but then we knew that.
Well, that's okay. That's why we have the round table, and we want to bring in, we want to sort of, as they study Talmud, you know, they crack the nut and see we can get into the source of the issue and of the conflict. Meir, Javedanfar, can you weigh in on this from your point of view? Give us a sense of what's happening in Iran from a socio and economic point of view, an ideological point of view. Is this a regime, thus far, some argue that from a nuclear standpoint, they've kept to the agreement. If you look at some of the reports of recent inspections, although those inspections have been far less detailed than the ones before the JCPOA, how are you seeing it from where you are?
I would have to respectfully correct you there. The inspections after the JCPOA are far more stringent than the inspections before the JCPOA. There are Iran's enrichment sites are being visited every day by the IAEA inspectors. There are some tourist sites in Iran which don't get foreign visitors every day. So this is the most stringent. Have the right to have enrichment on their soil. They view it as their right as an independent nation. They were fed up with the way the Iranian regime had isolated the world, and basically that turned the Iranian nuclear program into what is probably today the biggest white elephant project. Probably the most expensive chemical that was being produced in the world prior to the JCPOA was a kilo of enriched Iranian uranium, when you take into consideration how much Iran was paying for the sanctions which was imposed on it. So people were fed up then, and I hear that people today are not too happy with Mr. Rouhani because in some ways he promised too much before the sanctions were lifted, and afterwards when sanctions were lifted, in Iran, the president, former Prime Minister Bazargan, when he resigned after the U.S. Embassy takeover, said a prime minister in Iran is like somebody who holds a knife, but the blade is in somebody else's hand. And in this case, the same applies to the president. The blade is in Ayatollah Khamenei's hand, so he's tried to improve the economy of the country. But Ayatollah Khamenei, of course, and the revolutionary institutions who are given more power by the constitution of the Islamic Republic are making it very hard for him to fight corruption and to execute some of his important economic policies. So people are not happy, but I think he will probably win anyway. I mean, as much as you can forecast Iranian politics, Iranian elections 4 months before. But I think people are just in Iran. Majority of people want to get on with their lives and want the government to focus on the economy, and more important than that, to focus on the environment. Dan, it's very difficult to breathe in Tehran during daytime. The levels of pollution are sky high. According to Iran's environmental minister, Mrs. Diker, last year there were only 15 days when Tehran had air that was healthy enough to breathe. So there are many, many problems that they want the government and the regime to resolve. But one of the biggest issues here is the struggle between the regime and the government. And this is slowing down many important programs, and it's prolonging the infighting.
Thank you, Meir, for giving us sort of the internal look, even a grassroots look, from the people in the direction of the government. What I want to bring up is this notion of the deception. There's a certain deception going on regarding the JCPOA, certainly from an Israeli point of view. And I want to ask Dr. Karmon if he would comment on this. Many in the security echelons in Israel, where there is not a serious difference of opinion over the multi-faced threat that still exists in the aftermath of the JCPOA, in the sense of a traditional military terrorist threat that was not addressed, the behavior of Iran that was not addressed in the agreement. And many of our listeners who are professionals, academic and strategy people and government people and security professionals, perhaps are less aware when you move away from the strict understanding of the nuclear aspect of the challenge that Israel has with Iran, and ultimately the rest of the world has with Iran, but this notion of regional and global supremacy on the ground as an insurgent, essentially leading insurgencies around the region and around the globe. Dr. Karmon, can you comment on that as to what the current dangers are, such as 150,000 rockets facing Israel from Iran-dominated Lebanon and Syria?
I agree with Ori that the regime is pragmatic and even sophisticated, I would say. But if we look to the strategy and the achievements of the regime, they are practically succeeding, at least on the regional level. For instance, they succeeded in sustaining the Assad regime with Russian support, and they were very much involved in bringing Russia to Syria. You see their influence, growing influence in Iraq. You see what happens in Yemen, where the Houthis control half of the country, and they are more and more ideologically part of the Shia or Iranian axis, not only militarily. And as Michael Ledeen said, they were involved in faraway continents, like in Venezuela, in Bolivia, where, by the way, they are teaching the officers in a regional school, and also using Spanish-speaking TV for the continent. But as regards the nuclear agreement, the main problem, I think, with the nuclear agreement was that the Obama administration could have reached a much better agreement. The negotiations were, in my opinion, and most of the, or many of the experts, were done in a very mild way, in the sense that it permitted, it gave legitimacy to the Iranians to develop their enrichment program, and in the 8 to 10 years becoming really, technologically at least, nuclear power. For the moment, they are indeed, according to the AAU, they are say respecting all the clauses of the agreement. I don't know if this will happen in 2 or 3 years. What will happen in 2 or 3 years? So the problem, I think, between Israel and the new administration, Trump administration, but also with European countries, and even with the Russians, is to ensure that besides the issue of developing this capability, nuclear capability, their strategic behavior, first of all, in the region, and clearly they are a subversive force against the Sunni, what is called moderate countries, most of them, not only in the Gulf, but beyond, even in North Africa, as we saw also in Nigeria. And therefore, this and the missile program, which is clearly built in order to give them the platform how to use, after 5, 10 years, the nuclear capability. So I think what must be done is to press the regime, either through sanctions or through other means, in order to not to stop, but at least to mitigate this kind of behavior, which until now has been successful from their point of view.
Can I just jump in here?
Please, add a quick. I'm going to go to Uri Goldberg, but go ahead and jump in, Meir. It's fine.
Just to make a comment regarding what Eli said. I mean, I would like Eli to answer. I have a question. He made some points, and I think it's important to raise them. But I have a very important question for Eli, which I would be very grateful if he would answer. And the question is this: for the nuclear agreements to be enforceable and to work, we needed to have inspectors to go on the ground to verify Iran's nuclear program, to make sure that it's abiding by the terms. We have inspectors on the ground. Now, if he wants to, and I think this is what we all ideally would want, Iran to completely give up its arsenal of weapons in Lebanon, which country would Eli think would be willing to send soldiers to Baalbek to supervise the disarmament of Hezbollah militia?
First of all, the inspectors did not reach really Parchin. And I heard...
it is in their mandate. They can reach Parchin.
I know.
It's in their mandate. But which mandate, which force would you do, which country does Eli know that would be willing to send soldiers to Baalbek in Lebanon to inspect the disarmament of Hezbollah?
Do you connect it to the issue of the nuclear inspections, or different from it?
No,
I think
to make sure, because if you want the disarmament of Hezbollah to be functionable, we need to have inspectors on the ground to make sure that Hezbollah has dismantled all its weapons and its missiles. So which country, in my opinion, would be suicidal enough to send armed soldiers to go to southern Lebanon to confront Hezbollah to make sure that it's disarming?
Well, Israel's done it. Well, Israel's done it.
No, but even Israel didn't do it, because there were in 2005 Security Council resolution to disarm Hezbollah. Nothing happened. There was another resolution in after the 2006 Second Lebanon War to stop arming Hezbollah. Nothing happened besides some embargo by German ships in the Mediterranean. And I think that this is, first of all, the Israeli government didn't take the necessary measures, because it is not sufficient to bomb from time to time the so-called strategic weapons coming from Syria or from Iran. So I don't think that there is any country that can send soldiers, but I think there are economic and political measures that can not stop for the moment, but still to change the course of events. And for instance, what should be done with the Hezbollah presence and Iranian presence in Syria, which want to build a platform not only in order to control Syria, but also to try to become a player, direct player against Israel from the Syrian Golan.
There's no dispute about that, but what I agree with entirely with Eli is that yes, there have been two resolutions, but this is my point is that people wanted Iran's support for Hezbollah to be included in the nuclear deal, and the response we got from Eli, which is correct, is exactly why it was not included. Because for a deal to work, to be enforceable, you need to have somebody to verify it, and there has never been anybody who's been willing to verify Hezbollah disarmament, which is why it wasn't included in the nuclear deal.
Well, I think there are those that. Ori, let me get to you. Before I'll answer that or turn to Michael Ledeen and have him answer perhaps why a number of other issues like even ballistic missile development was handled with a much lighter hand than even uranium development. Plutonium development wasn't handled as strictly. Heavy water usage wasn't handled. There are a lot of things that weren't handled in this particular agreement, as well as Iran's behavior in other countries around the world and supply of terror. But Ori Goldberg, tell us what in your view is the best way for the West to exercise its behavior now towards Iran? One, and two, why does it seem that the Iranian regime has intensified its negative behavior and statements towards the West since the JCPOA?
To the best of my understanding, I think it's important to understand the JCPOA first and foremost as a political instrument. That is, it is not a means for regulating international security regime. It's a political instrument. It was signed between two politically motivated parties. And for that reason, I think the West, as you said in your opening statement, Dan, intentionally left some things, as you call them, more lightly handled because they were meant to be platforms for further engagement. They were also meant to provide the West, and I think the Obama administration actually acted upon that, even if in limited fashion. They were meant to provide the West with means to pressure Iran should such pressure be required. The ballistic missile issue is one of them. With regard to Iranian behavior since the JCPOA, again, I think there's a real split in the Iranian leadership, in the Iranian regime. I agree with Meir when he says that the blade of the knife is being held by the supreme leader, but still Iranian leadership is speaking with at least two distinct voices. I would say that along with very public, rhetorical expressions of disdain, hatred, hostile commitment against the West, there's also been very consistent cooperation, very consistent conversation with the West on the part of Iran. There's been outreach on the part of the Iranians towards a number of partners, potential partners of theirs on the international arena. And I think, by the way, that's very characteristic of the way the Iranians do business. They can pursue two seemingly contradictory paths at the same time.
Maybe not seemingly, maybe absolutely contradictory paths.
They wanted economically to profit from the agreements.
And
but
that,
yes,
not
but
strategically.
the money,
What?
the whole deal is about money. All this talk about the nuclear deal with Iran, no one has to this day ever signed anything. Not the United States, not Iran, not Europe, not anybody. Right? It's all, and the Iranian regime just a few days ago issued some kind of warning to Trump. It's hard to figure out exactly what it means, but they said, you had better not reveal all the secret agreements that we made with Obama that are part of that deal. Because if you do, there are going to be consequences. So, and I must excuse myself, Dan, because it's getting late in the morning and I have to run now. But the Iranian threat is very serious. I do not see the regime as particularly divided. On the contrary, I think Khamenei still calls all the shots, makes all the basic decisions. And I think that there are no fundamental disagreements between Rouhani and Khamenei. And the final point is what some of us have been saying for a very long time. You want to deal with the Iranian terror problem or nuclear problem or ballistic missile problem, you need regime change in Tehran, and that's the only way it's going to happen.
All right, Michael Ledeen from Washington, thanks for joining us on this segment, Counterterrorism Today, and have a great day, and we'll see you back here soon. Thank you very much. I'm going to turn to, or you were in the middle of making an important point about Iran.
Well, yes, and I think Dr. Ledeen helped me by highlighting some of the areas where we disagree. It's not that I think the regime is speaking with two distinct voices. I don't think it's internally divided. I think the Islamic Republic is actually as stable as it has ever been. And effectively speaking, I doubt anyone can affect regime change in Tehran if there's no genuine popular will that'll bring it about. And that's because the Islamic regime has managed to sustain an internal discourse that, again, is capable of various opinions, very often contradictory, regarding both its demeanor and its ideology. And on the matter of ideology, on the matter of what it is that actually motivates the Islamic Republic, I would say that the entire debate in the West regarding how to treat Iran, how to engage Iran, how to deal with Iran, all in the eye of the beholder, hinges on some very basic, almost axiomatic assumptions with regard to their ideology. I would say that on one side you have people who assume that the Iranian regime is fanatic in its desire to impose its Shia ideology and its form of government on the world or on the region or whatever. And that is its supreme goal, and as such, all other goals or potential outcomes are derivatives of it. On the other side, you would have people who think, and I would count myself in that camp, who think that the Iranian regime's ideology is, and I base my statement on my understanding of its Shia origins, that the Iranian regime's ideology is based on a very pragmatic understanding of the world and of realpolitik. The Shia have a minority's sensitivity and sensibility for understanding the way the world actually works, because the minority often ends up with the short end of the stick. And in that sense, again, I'm not suggesting that they're great liberals or humanitarians, but I am saying that the Iranians see themselves as, at the very least, partners for doing business. The Iranians see that perhaps as the most important imperative of both their foreign policy, and I would venture as much as to say their ideology as well.
Meir Javedanfar, are you as optimistic as Dr. Goldberg is about the practical approach, realpolitik of the Iranian regime, one voice, two voice, three voice, multiple voices inside the regime?
Oh, the Iranian political system is it's a dual system. One is the government and one is the regime. And the regime institutions were created after the revolution in order to make sure that to protect the revolution, in order to make sure that the government doesn't topple the revolution. And this goes back to the 1953 overthrow of Mossadegh, when Mossadegh was in charge and then he was overthrown. So after 1979, they wanted to make sure that this doesn't happen again. Hence why we have revolutionary institutions such as the Guardian Council and the Assembly of Experts, and of course we have regime security institutions such as the Revolutionary Guard. Now, the regime institutions are hardline. They want to make sure to continue with the exporting of the revolution, to confront the United States and Israel for as long as possible. But the government, in this case, Mr. Rouhani being in charge, him being a disciple of Mr. Rafsanjani, they belong to the Republican school. What does the Republican school of thought in the Islamic Republic think? That the revolutionary phase is over. Now let's treat Iran as the Islamic Republic, emphasis on the Republic of Iran. Basically saying, let's normalize. Let's focus on domestic problems. We have enough problems in our own country without going across the world to solve other people's country problems or to confront other issues such as Israel, etc., etc. They don't like Israel. I don't think they're going. They're lovers of Zion. But they just want to deal with their own problems. They have bigger problems in Iran.
But why is Iran spending so much money billions and billions of dollars on nuclear military infrastructures that Israeli intelligence has confirmed time and time and time again.
And subversion.
It has not.
And subversion across the world. Why are they spending so many resources when the 72 million 72 million people in Iran, wouldn't we say? 80 million people in Iran are struggling still economically quite substantially in terms of the lower middle class.
As far as we know, Iran is not working on a military nuclear program at least after the JCPOA. But there is, of course, in Iran many people who ask the question, why is it? And it's fair. Ideally, yes, as far as I know, Iranians would like to help other people around the world. Let's not forget that after revolutions, usually we have, when revolutions come to power, they want to export it. And the French Revolution was the same also. And this is the same with the Iranian Revolution and the Russian Revolution. But, I think majority of people of Iran are in the phase of the Republican. They want Iran to be a normalized republic. But then the blade of the knife is in the hand of the revolutionary institutions, regime institutions. And they are the ones who set policy on important issues such as the nuclear program, such as foreign policy in the Middle East. It's not the foreign minister that's in charge in the Middle East. It's the file is with the Revolutionary Guard. So they need to always be in a revolutionary state in order to maintain and justify the political status. But more important, and this is far more important than to maintain their economic status. These people have a very specific and important economic status which they will be loath to lose should there be another revolution.
The bottom line, Dr. Karmon, is one who introduced me to the great Amir Taheri once when he was visiting the state of Israel. He said Iran is basically continues to be an Islamic revolutionary cause with very serious military nuclear intentions. Your sense of it?
I don't agree that Rouhani, the government, is more moderate than the regime. Because Rouhani, for 20 years, worked not with Rafsanjani, who worked directly with Khamenei. And he was in store because of Khamenei's decision and continues to be a candidate for next presidency because Khamenei wants him. I'm very aware that the people of Iran, or most of the elites, are indeed against the regime. But after the oppression in 1999 and then in 2005 or 2009, they are not able to rebel against the regime. So what happened to them? I think that Iranians have a bigger problem in the minorities, because if you look to the Iranian demographic situation, it's worse than Syria. 55% of the Iranians are Persians, and some 25-30% are Sunnis. Kurds, Arabs, and Baluchis. And we don't know how this will develop in the next 5 or 10 years. And I think that this is an internal threat as big as the one of the, say, the economic situation. On the nuclear issue, if you look to what happened in North Korea, I think there is worry not only in Israel, but also in the United States, and perhaps this will be one of the most important tasks of the Trump administration, to deal with the North Korean project, because we know that the North Koreans were responsible for building the Syrian reactor, which was bombed in 2005.
So you see Iranian fingerprints also with North Korea?
In 2007, already they were involved. It was a triangle project, not only the Syrians. And there is some information. First of all, they cooperated in the issue of missiles. And it's very possible that instead of enriching or developing the military aspect of the project in Iran, they will do it with the North Koreans. So this, I think, would be a very important file for the Israeli and the Western intelligence and for the political decision makers in the near future.
Ori, last thoughts for you, sir?
I have to say that I think these descriptions of Iran as inherently unstable.
I didn't say stable.
I think, as I said before, the Islamic Republic is as stable as it's ever been. I think the state of the regime, despite all the potential threats from within and from without, is actually quite powerful. I think that understanding Iran and engaging Iran is a problematic endeavor for a lot of Western pundits and decision makers, because of the basic assumption that understands Iran to be this radical, fanatic element. I think a lot of other countries in the region, including Saudi Arabia and Israel, spend a great deal of money on preparing potential nuclear arsenals and attack plans. I think they're seen as moderate or moderating powers, and I think that as an intellectual exercise, if we can simply turn the tables for a second, I think it's not unreasonable for the Iranians to make a case that they're not very different from anybody else in the region. They're taking care of themselves. They are a solitary people, as Israelis like to call themselves. They don't see themselves as potentially allied with any Arab countries. They need to defend their borders against various powers that seek to do them harm, from Pakistan and potentially Afghanistan to their historical entanglements with Russia. And I think what the Iranians are trying very hard to do at the moment, and this includes the Revolutionary Guard, is exude a vibe that says, talk to us. You know, we're amenable to conversation. Let's talk and see what we can do. And in that particular sense, I want to add to what Meir Javedanfar said. I want to add 2 points. What he said about the economic status of the Revolutionary Guards, that is a moderating force. It's very hard to take care of one's stringent revolutionary credentials and also take care of a flourishing economy. And the other thing I want to say about the potential of what he called the regime to overturn the government's achievements, the regime has been consistently failing at finding a candidate to compete against Rouhani in the upcoming presidential election. That's not an accident.
So Rouhani is not part of the regime, according to your view?
No, but
No?
I'm using
What is it
I'm using Meir's distinction. I didn't necessarily sign on to that.
So Meir, do you see Rouhani part of the regime or an opposition to the regime?
Meir Javedanfar, do you see Rouhani as part of the regime?
His ideology, of course, he's part of the Islamic Republic, but his ideology as to what direction Iran should take in its dealings with the international community, I think, runs opposite to Khamenei.
And despite the descriptions that we've heard so far of how Khamenei and the regime are working very hard to impose their direction or even call all the shots, they've been failing consistently in finding somebody to run against him. His chances of winning are high because there is no single candidate that can lead what we've heard described here as a very coherent cause. I think that cause is beginning to unravel. I'm not saying it's not dangerous. I'm not saying it doesn't have potential. But I think this third way that Rouhani is leading, this combination of regime and republic, is probably the most dominant popular political movement in Iran right now. If I would look to the future, that is what I would look to.
But maybe as we wrap up here, could we at least get some consensus? You know, in Israel, even among scholars like around this table, there's always a robust conversation about every critical, acute, and existential issue. Can we move away from this discussion saying that Israel certainly should keep its bulletproof vests intact for the meantime when they look to the north and they see tens of thousands of or 20,000 Hezbollah fighters and Hezbollah at the direction of Khamenei in Lebanon as now re-engaging with Hamas in Gaza, that the threat to Israel as being surrounded by the Revolutionary Guards is still a reality that's intact or one that shouldn't be taken lightly?
I would say yes, but reservedly so. I think Israel has more pressing issues. I think it should definitely keep its bulletproof vest on. I think there's a general consensus in Israel's security services that what amounts to an existential threat to Israel today is not necessarily coming from the direction of Iran.
But coming from the direction of Hezbollah.
It's not an existential threat, not Iran and not Hezbollah. It is a very major strategic threat, especially the possibility that with Russian support, the Iranians will build an army, because they don't have a real army, an air force, and they will become the new Eastern Front, what Israel dreaded in the past with Iraq, Syria and Jordan. It will be the Eastern Front that they already succeeded, and I think the if you want, the test will be what will happen with Syria or the Iranian and Hezbollah presence inside Syria if an agreement is achieved.
Well, here we have it, gentlemen. Dr. Uri Goldberg, Dr. Eli Karmon, Meir Javedanfar, who I think just dropped off the line. Thank you as well on your behalf, and also to Dr. Michael Ledeen, the co-author with the outgoing National Security Advisor of the United States, Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, The Field of Fight. This has been a very well-informed discussion, and We hope to have many more as we move forward in counterterrorism today. We say shalom, goodbye from Herzliya, Israel. This is Dan Diker, Research Fellow at the International Counterterrorism Institute at the IDC Herzliya. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Counterterrorism Today, a collaboration with ICT, Voice of Israel, and IDC International Radio.